So now we're going to read chapter 4 of Dangerous Journey. Chapter 4 is called The Fight with Apollyon. Then I saw in my dream that on the morrow Christian desired to go forward on his journey. But the ladies of the house, whose names were Charity, Piety, Prudence, and Discretion, told him that he should not depart thence till they had shown him the rarities of the place. For if the day be clear, they said, we will show you the delectable mountains. So he consented and stayed, and when morning was up, they took him to the roof of the palace. Look to the south, they said. So he did, and behold, the mountains in the sunlight were indeed delectable and beautified with woods. From the top of the mountains, they told him, you may see the gate of the celestial city. This greatly encouraged him. Yet in truth, the city was still a long way off, and the journey, as we know, had all to be done on foot. So once again, Christian desired to be going. But once again, they detained him. Now it was the turn of Charity to question him. Have you a family? Asked Charity. Are you a married man? Yes, I have a wife and 4 small children, Christian replied. Then why didn't you bring them along with you to share in your felicity? She questioned. At this, our traveler began to weep. Oh, how willingly I would have done so, but they were all of them averse to going on pilgrimage. My wife was afraid of losing the comforts of this world, and my children were given to the foolish delights of youth. So what with one thing and another, to my great grief, they would not come. From all that had befallen him so far, you may think he did prudently to make the journey alone. The other damsels said as much, but still they would not let him go, until they had led him to the armory. Here they showed him some of the objects from which the servants of the Lord had done wonderful things. They showed him Moses' rod, the hammer and nail with which Joel slain Sisera, the pitchers, the trumpets, and the lamps too, with which Gideon put to fight the armies of Midian. They showed him also the jawbone of the donkey, with which Samson had done mighty deeds, and they showed him the sling and the stone, with which David slew the giant Goliath. And then they fitted Christian out with armor, which their Lord provided for the use of travelers, that they should be ready for any assaults along the way, and they should stand their ground when things were at their worst, and having done all then to stand. First, the helmet and the breastplate that could save his life, and then the faithful shield to fend off the fiery darts of the wicked, and then the trusty sword that would cut through anything. Finally, his feet were shod with shoes that would never wear out. Must be those. For as he was setting out now, they said, he was not setting out against human foes, but against the wiles of the devil. Thus, fully armed, did Christian hurry to the gate, and there he asked the porter, Have you seen any other pilgrim pass this way? The porter answered, Yes. Pray, did you know him? Asked Christian. I asked him his name, and he told me it was Faithful. He is my townsman, my near neighbor, Christian exclaimed. He comes from the place where I was born. How far do you think he is ahead of me? Well, by this time he'll be below the hill, answered the porter. Well, good porter, the Lord be with you. If I hasten, I may catch him. He was not to overtake his friend that day. Instead, he found himself in a solitary valley called the Valley of Humiliation. Here, after he had stopped to partake of the bread and the wine and the raisins which the damsels had given him, he was feeling well content. Perhaps, he said to himself, the worst is over. And then, all of a sudden, a darkness fell across the sun. What could it be? He roused himself, and there he saw, stalking towards him, the towering shape of a foul fiend. He was at least 9 feet high, and the nearer he came, the more hideous he grew. He had scales like a fish, and they are his pride. He had wings like a dragon, and feet like a bear, and out of his belly came fire and smoke. As happens in a dream, Christian recognized the fiend at once, and he knew his name. It was Apollyon. Terrified, he cast in his mind whether to go back or to stay firm. And then, considering that he had no armor on his back, to turn his back to this monster would give him the advantage. So he resolved to stay firm. The fiend had now drawn very close. He looked upon Christian with a disdainful countenance, and thus began to question him. Where have you come from? I've come from the city of destruction, which is the place of all evil. By this I perceive that you are one of my subjects, said Apollyon, for I am the prince of that city, and all that country is mine. Why then are you running away from your prince? I was indeed born in your dominions, admitted Christian, but I have given my allegiance to another, who is the king of princes. How can I now with fairness go back on this? You did the same to me, and yet I am willing to pass it over, replied Apollyon. What I promised you was in my infancy. What I promised you was in my infancy, said Christian. Besides, to tell you the truth, I like his service better than yours. You have already been unfaithful to him, exclaimed Apollyon. You fell in the slough of despond. You slept and let fall your parchment, and in all you say and do, you're inwardly desirous of vain glory. Too well I know it. Yet the king whom I serve now is merciful and ready to forgive me. I am the enemy of this king, said Apollyon. I hate his person, his laws, and his people. Moreover, there is no prince who will lightly lose his subjects, neither will I lose you. Give him the slip, and work for me, and your wages shall be doubled. I know your wages, you destroying Apollyon. They are not such as a man can live on. They are the wages of death. And then Apollyon broke into a grievous rage. What you say is true. Therefore prepare yourself to die. Apollyon, beware what you're doing, cried Christian, for I am on the king's highway, the way of holiness. Therefore take heed of yourself. But Apollyon straddled over the whole breadth of the way and barred his path. Uh-oh. I am void of fear in this matter. I swear by my infernal den that you shall go no further. Here will I spill your soul. And without more ado, the fiend threw a flaming dart at Christian's breast. But Christian had his shield in his hand and so prevented him. And then Christian drew his sword, for he saw it was time to bestir himself. And the fiend made fast at him, and threw his darts as thick as hail. And though he did all he could to avoid them, in spite of the new armor that he wore, Christian was wounded in the head, and the hand, and the foot, and he was forced to yield ground. But he still resisted as manfully as he could, hoping perhaps some other traveler would hear the clash of arms and come to his assistance. But many within earshot were too cowardly to fight. They made a wide detour around the encounter, such a fiend. The combat now had lasted half the day. You couldn't imagine, if you had not been there, what yelling and roaring Apollyon made, and what sighs and groans burst from the pilgrim's heart. For you must know that by reason of his wounds, Christian was growing weaker by the hour. Then Apollyon saw his chance, and came in close, and wrestling with Christian, gave him such a dreadful fall that his sword flew from his hand. Ha ha, now I am sure of you, the fiend cried. And kneeling on him, as he lay helplessly upon his back, he pressed him near to death. But, as God would have it, while the Apollyon was preparing his final blow, thereby to make an end of this good man, Christian nimbly stretched out his hand for his sword, and caught it, saying, Rejoice not against me, O mine enemy. When I fall, I shall arise. And with that he ran Apollyon through. And with a terrible roar, as one that had received a mortal wound, the fiend drew back. And then, for the first time, Christian smiled. For looking up, he saw Apollyon spread his dragon's wings and fly away, dripping blood over the fields as he went. So the battle was over, and Christian offered thanks for his deliverance. But he too was bleeding copiously, and if he was to bleed to death, his victory would have been in vain. Then, in his mercy, God directed him towards a certain tree, the tree of life, the leaves of which he applied to all his wounds. They staunched the flow of blood, and he was healed immediately. He also sat down in that place to eat and to drink. And so, feeling refreshed, Christian went forward to the valley's end. He left his heavy armor there, but kept his sword still drawn in his hand. For all I know, he said, some other enemy lies even now in wait for me. Indeed, far worse things did lay ahead of him, worse even than his combat with the fiend. Chapter 5 is called The Valley of the Shadow of Death. That'll be good. That was chapter 4 of Dangerous Journey.